The desert was a furnace, a boundless expanse of gold and bone where heat shimmered like ghosts and the air itself seemed to choke men's lungs. In June 1942, North Africa was not a battlefield. It was hell's own anvil, and upon it the armies of Britain and Germany clashed for control of the lifeline that was the Suez Canal. At the center of it all stood one man, a figure whispered about with a mix of fear and admiration, General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. The calm before the sandstorm. At dawn, the German Afrika Korps prepared their machines. Long columns of Panzer III and IV tanks crouched like steel beasts, their guns pointed toward the horizon. Mechanics worked feverishly under the already blazing sun, tightening bolts and wiping grit from the delicate optics. The smell of oil and dust hung thick in the air. Rommel stood atop a command half-track, field glasses in hand. His gaze swept the desert, sharp and calculating. Unlike many generals, he led from the front, close enough to hear the rattle of machine guns and the screams of dying men. His men trusted him, because he was there, with them, risking everything. His opponent that day was the British Eighth Army, entrenched across the Libyan sands near Gazala. The British had minefields, anti-tank guns, and the harsh desert on their side. But Rommel had something else. Daring. "Today," Rommel muttered in his clipped, precise German, "we strike like the fox. Fast. Silent. Deadly. Clash in the dunes." By mid-morning, the desert thundered. Engines roared, tracks churned sand into clouds, and the panzer divisions surged forward. Dust plumes rose like columns of smoke, masking the battlefield. The British artillery opened fire, their shells bursting with savage thunder. Black clouds of smoke smeared the horizon as tanks exploded in balls of fire. Rommel's tanks weaved through minefields, guided by reconnaissance units that had marked safe paths in the night. But the British were ready. Lines of 6-pounder anti-tank guns spat fire, punching holes through the advancing panzers. Oberleutnant Hans Keller, commanding a Panzer IV, shouted into his radio, "Fire at the flashes! Suppress those guns!" His tank's 75mm cannon barked, sending high-explosive rounds into the British positions. Sand and shrapnel erupted, but for every silenced gun, 2 more seemed to appear. The Afrika Korps pressed on, relentless. Rommel himself rode forward in his staff car, standing tall despite the storm of steel around him. He pointed, gesturing tanks into position, urging them to flank the British. Bullets cracked overhead, but he remained calm. His presence steadied the men. Sand hell. By noon, the battlefield had become a vision of hell. Burning tanks littered the dunes, their twisted hulks belching smoke. The desert wind carried the acrid stench of fuel, cordite, and death. The Afrika Korps, though bloodied, pushed deeper. Rommel executed his plan, a sweeping hook maneuver designed to cut behind the British lines. His tank struck like a coiled snake, bypassing strongpoints and tearing into the British rear. Major Richard Collins of the British 22nd Armoured Brigade realized too late what was happening. From the command trench, he saw dust clouds rising on his flank. "By God," he whispered, "he's gone around us." He rallied his Crusader tanks, ordering them to intercept. The Crusaders charged, their 2-pounder guns blazing. A duel erupted in the dunes, Crusader against Panzer, steel against steel. The Panzer IVs had heavier guns, but the Crusaders were faster, darting between dunes. Shells screamed through the air, striking armor with ear-splitting clangs. Some tanks went up instantly, crews incinerated in fiery tombs. Others limped on, wounded but defiant. Rommel's strategy was working. The British were being pulled apart, their defenses shredded. The turning point. Yet victory was not certain. As afternoon shadows stretched, the Afrika Korps began to run low on fuel and ammunition, a constant curse of desert warfare. British artillery, resupplied and reinforced, hammered the German flanks. Each shell sent geysers of sand and steel skyward. Rommel scanned the battlefield, his eyes narrowing. He knew if he hesitated, the attack would collapse. He called his officers. "One final thrust," he declared. "We break them here, or we die here." The order rippled through the German lines. Tank crews braced themselves, gripping controls slick with sweat. The Panzers roared forward once more, guns blazing, engines screaming in protest. Hans Keller's Panzer IV led the charge. Ahead, a British Crusader crested a dune, its gun already firing. The round slammed into Keller's tank, tearing a gouge across the armor. Sparks and fire erupted inside. Keller coughed, choking on smoke, but he refused to abandon. "Forward!" he bellowed, slamming another shell into the breach. His gun thundered, blasting the Crusader into a rolling fireball. The Germans crashed through, overwhelming the British line with sheer ferocity. Anti-tank crews fought to the last man, firing until tanks crushed their guns beneath treads. The desert was littered with shattered steel, the sky black with burning fuel. Rommel's gamble. The battle reached its climax at dusk. The sinking sun painted the sands blood red, casting long shadows across the wreckage. Both armies were exhausted, their machines battered, their men parched and trembling from heat and fear. Rommel climbed onto a dune, watching as the last British tanks pulled back in retreat. His men cheered, voices hoarse, some collapsing from fatigue. Against all odds, the Afrika Korps had broken through. But Rommel knew the truth. It was a victory bought at terrible cost. Hundreds of Panzers were gone, thousands of men lost. Supplies were dwindling. He could not hold the desert forever. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. His gamble had worked. The Desert Fox had struck again. Epilogue: Legacy in the sand. As night fell, silence reclaimed the battlefield. Fires smoldered among the dunes, casting eerie glows across the wreckage. The stars emerged, cold and indifferent to the carnage below. Rommel walked among the survivors, speaking to them, encouraging them. He was not a distant general but a man of flesh and blood, sharing the risks and scars of war. His soldiers would follow him anywhere, for he had led them through sand hell and delivered victory. History would remember that day as one of Rommel's greatest feats, a masterclass in daring maneuver and iron will. But for the men who fought it, the memory was etched not in glory but in fire, smoke, and the endless sands of North Africa.